The rain had been falling over Seattle since late afternoon, the kind of rain that doesn't announce itself with thunder, but seeps quietly into your bones. I was sitting on the leather sofa in the living room, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the papers on the glass table in front of me. My name is Evelyn Parker. Across from me sat my husband of 7 years, Daniel Parker. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad either. His face was calm, polished, almost professional, as if we were closing a business deal instead of ending a marriage. The sharp click of his pen echoed in the room when he placed it down. That sound cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. "Sign it," Daniel said. His tone was flat. "There's no reason to drag this out." I looked down at the divorce papers. His signature was already there. Bold, confident, final. Outside, rain streaked down the windows, blurring the city lights into long, trembling lines. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, as if someone had tied a knot around it. "This house is in my name," he continued, standing up and straightening his jacket. "The car, too. You came into this marriage with nothing, and you'll leave the same way. I'll give you some money. Enough to rent a room and get back on your feet. Consider it courtesy." Courtesy. 7 years collapsed into that single word. I had poured most of my savings into this home. I had built my business while supporting his career. I had believed every promise he ever made. And now he was erasing me with the same ease he used to erase emails. "Why?" I asked quietly. My voice barely sounded like my own. "What did I do wrong?" Daniel smiled, not warmly, not kindly. It was the smile of someone who had already moved on. "You didn't do anything wrong, Evelyn," he said. "You just don't fit into my life anymore." That was when the bedroom door opened. My mother-in-law, Margaret Parker, walked in slowly. She was wearing silk pajamas, her hair neatly brushed, her expression composed. She glanced at the papers, then at me, and let out a short, dismissive laugh. "What are you waiting for?" she said sharply. 7 years and you still haven't given this family anything worth keeping. Sign and go." I stood up, my hands shaking. "I paid for this house. I paid for your medical bills. I paid for Vanessa's education. I didn't take anything from this family." Margaret's eyes hardened. "Proof," she snapped. "Where's your proof? Everything is in my son's name. You gave what you gave because you wanted to. Now stop embarrassing yourself." She turned to Daniel. "Throw her out. I don't want her under this roof another minute." He didn't hesitate. He grabbed my arm, dragged me to the front door, and pushed me outside. I stumbled, falling hard onto the cold stone porch. The rain soaked through my clothes instantly. The door began to close. At the last second, Margaret stepped out, holding an old, torn canvas bag, the one I used to take to the market. She threw it at my feet. "Take your trash," she said coldly, "and never show your face here again." The door slammed shut. I was alone, soaked, shaking, sitting in the rain with nothing but a suitcase and a ragged bag beside me. I picked up the bag with trembling hands, and when I opened it, everything changed. Before that night, before the rain and the divorce papers, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. Daniel and I met when we were both young and hopeful. He had just moved to Seattle, full of ambition, but still finding his footing. I had recently graduated and was pouring every ounce of energy I had into a small fashion boutique I named Lark and Lane. It was nothing glamorous at first, just a narrow space, a few racks of clothing, and a dream that felt bigger than the room itself. Daniel used to sit on a stool near the register while I worked late. He would watch me fold clothes, manage inventory, talk to customers. He told me he admired my drive. He said I inspired him. I believed him. We married quietly. No grand venue, no luxury honeymoon, just family, close friends, and promises whispered with absolute certainty. After the wedding, we lived modestly. I kept growing my business, slowly turning one boutique into two, then three. Larkin Lane became profitable, stable, respected. I never hid that success from Daniel. I shared my numbers. I shared my plans. I shared my wins. I thought marriage meant transparency, teamwork, trust. When Daniel struggled early in his career, I supported him without hesitation. When he landed his first major promotion, I celebrated him like it was my own achievement. And when he talked about wanting to give his family a better life, I didn't question it. His parents lived in an aging house that needed constant repairs. When his mother fell ill, I paid for the treatments without ever mentioning money. When the bills piled up, I handled them quietly. I told myself that this was what family did for one another. Then there was his sister, Vanessa. She was bright, ambitious, and eager to leave Seattle to chase bigger dreams. When she talked about expensive programs and opportunities she couldn't afford, I saw myself in her younger years. I offered to help, not as a loan, not with conditions, just help. For years, I sent money regularly, tuition, living expenses, everything she needed so she could focus on building her future. I sacrificed vacations. I postponed expansions. I told myself it was temporary, that it would all be worth it one day. As Lark and Lane stabilized, I stepped back from daily operations. I wanted to be more present at home. I cooked. I organized. I waited for Daniel at night. I believed I was investing in our marriage the same way I had invested in my business. I never thought of myself as generous. I thought of myself as loyal. And loyalty, I would soon learn, is the easiest thing to exploit when it is given without protection. The change didn't happen overnight. That was the most dangerous part of it. At first, it was subtle. Daniel started coming home later than usual. He said work was demanding more of him. New clients, new expectations, new pressure. I believed him, because ambition had always been part of who he was. Then the late nights turned into missed dinners. Missed dinners turned into weekends spent networking. His phone was always face down. His answers became shorter, colder. When I asked if something was wrong, he sighed like I was exhausting him. "You worry too much," he said. "This is just how success looks." Around that time, Vanessa came back to Seattle. She wasn't the same girl I had supported for years. She dressed differently, spoke differently. She talked about circles I didn't recognize and opportunities I didn't understand. She teased me about staying home too much, about focusing on my business instead of enjoying life. "A woman needs to keep up," she once said casually. "Men get bored when things feel predictable." I laughed it off. I thought she was just young and blunt. I didn't realize she was testing boundaries. Daniel began going out with her more often. Dinners, events, private gatherings. He said Vanessa was helping him make connections. I wanted to be supportive, so I stayed quiet. But the house felt different. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped listening. When I tried to talk about Larkin Lane, he waved me off. "You've already made your money," he said once. "Let me focus on mine." That sentence stayed with me. Sometimes he came home smelling unfamiliar. Not like cologne, like someone else. When I asked, he snapped. "Do you hear yourself?" he said. "You sound paranoid." I started questioning my instincts instead of his behavior. I cooked his favorite meals. I dressed better. I tried harder. And the more I tried, the more distant he became. He spoke to me like a problem that needed managing, not a partner who deserved honesty. Margaret noticed too. She grew sharper with me, more critical. She commented on how quiet I was, how little space I seemed to take up. "You've changed," she said once. "You used to be more useful." I told myself it was stress. I told myself all marriages went through seasons. I told myself patience was strength. What I didn't know was that patience to the wrong people looks exactly like permission. And while I was trying to save a marriage, Daniel and Vanessa were quietly preparing to end it on their terms. I just didn't know yet that I wasn't losing control. I was being pushed out of it. The rain slowed to a thin, icy drizzle as I walked away from the house I had once called home. My suitcase rolled behind me, its wheels catching on cracks in the sidewalk. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I stopped beneath the awning of a closed cafe and sat down on the cold concrete. My hands were numb. My thoughts were empty. The only thing beside me was the torn canvas bag Margaret had thrown at my feet like a final insult. I stared at it for a long moment. It was the same bag I used to take to the market. Faded, frayed at the edges, ordinary. I expected to find a few old clothes inside, maybe things they didn't bother to keep. With a slow breath, I opened it. The first thing I saw wasn't clothing. It was a small, dark blue passbook wrapped in clean leather, new, completely out of place. I took it out, confused. The bank name was familiar. My hands began to shake as I opened the first page. Account holder, Evelyn Parker. Balance, $20 million. I closed it, opened it again, read the numbers once more. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. This didn't make sense. I had never opened an account like this. I had never seen this kind of money in my life. Beneath the passbook was a folder of documents, neatly organized and sealed. Property papers. The address wasn't the house Daniel had thrown me out of. It was a townhouse in Queen Anne, one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Seattle. Owner, Evelyn Parker. Paid in full. My vision blurred. I pressed my fingers into my arm, grounding myself in the cold, solid pain. This was real. It had to be. At the bottom of the bag, I found an old prepaid phone and a folded letter taped carefully to the back of it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Margaret. I unfolded the letter slowly, my breath shallow. Evelyn, if you are reading this, you are probably hurt. You are probably angry, and you have every right to be. What I did today was cruel. It was deliberate, and it was the only way I could protect you. Daniel and Vanessa have been taking money from your company, not carelessly, systematically. They planned to leave you with nothing once they were finished. If I had warned you openly, they would have moved faster and destroyed evidence. So I played the role they expected. I let them believe I was on their side. The money and the property are yours. I moved what I could quietly and legally. Use the phone in this bag. Do not use your old one. Pretend you are broken. Pretend you have nothing. This is not over. But now, you are no longer alone. My chest tightened as tears finally fell. Not from despair this time, but from something I hadn't felt in a long while. Hope. I closed the bag, my hands steady now. The storm wasn't over, but I finally understood that it had never been meant to destroy me. It was meant to wake me up. I didn't go to my mother's house that night. Instinct told me not to. If Daniel or Vanessa decided to look for me, that would be the first place they checked. Instead, I called Tasha Reynolds. Tasha was someone I had helped years ago when she first moved to Seattle. We weren't inseparable friends, but there was trust between us, the kind built quietly, without expectations. Her voice cracked with concern when she heard mine. "Of course you can stay," she said without hesitation. "Come now." Her apartment was small, tucked into an older building far from the city center. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm, safe. She handed me dry clothes and a mug of tea without asking questions. That night, I told her just enough. I said my marriage had ended. I said I had been forced out. I didn't mention the money. I didn't mention Margaret. I needed the story to be simple, believable. Even kindness could become dangerous if it knew too much. When Tasha finally went to sleep, I sat alone on the couch with my laptop. I logged into the internal system for Lark and Lane. At first, everything looked normal. Sales, payroll, inventory. Then I focused on expenses from the last 6 months. My eyes stopped on a category labeled Consulting and Marketing Services. The payments were consistent. Too consistent. Each month, large sums were sent to a firm called Blue Ridge Consulting, LLC. I frowned. I didn't remember approving any long-term consulting contract, especially not one with numbers like these. I searched the company name. The registration details loaded slowly, each second stretching my nerves tighter. Owner and legal representative, Daniel Parker. The room felt suddenly too quiet. I leaned back, staring at the screen. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't carelessness. It was a plan. Daniel had built a shell company using my money, funneling funds out of the business I created, while standing in front of me every night and asking what was for dinner. My phone vibrated. A message from the prepaid phone. "They believe you left with nothing. They are already relaxing. Stay quiet." I'm watching. Margaret. I closed my laptop and exhaled slowly. For the first time since the rain soaked my clothes, I felt something solid beneath the fear. Control? They thought the story was over. It was just beginning. Once I knew where the money was going, the next question became unavoidable. Who was helping him? Daniel didn't have direct access to Lark and Lane's accounting system. He never had. I had kept financial controls tight from the beginning, not out of distrust, but out of habit. Good business required structure, which meant someone on the inside was opening doors for him. One name surfaced immediately: Paige Nolan. Paige had been my head accountant for 5 years, quiet, precise, reliable. She knew every invoice, every approval process, every safeguard I had put in place. I trusted her enough to stop checking behind her, and that trust suddenly felt very heavy. I pulled up older records and began comparing them side by side. The consulting invoices from Blue Ridge Consulting were clean on the surface. Proper formatting, correct language, the right signatures. Too right. They all followed the same structure, same wording, same timing, as if they had been copied and adjusted just enough to look legitimate. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was an audio file from Margaret. I hesitated before pressing play. Daniel's voice filled the room, tense and sharp. "She can't find anything," he said. "You made sure the records look clean, right?" Paige answered, her voice lower, strained. "Yes, but if she pushes for an audit, we'll need to erase the backup files." "Do it," Daniel replied. "Clean everything. No trace." The recording ended. I sat still, listening to the silence that followed. They weren't just stealing. They were preparing to destroy evidence. That was when I understood something crucial. People don't make mistakes when they feel threatened. They make mistakes when they feel safe. Daniel believed I was broken. Paige believed she was untouchable. And Margaret had been right. The more helpless I appeared, the more careless they would become. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't send emails. I didn't demand answers. Instead, I did nothing. I let them believe their plan was working. Because the truth was, every file they touched, every record they tried to erase, was leaving behind something far more dangerous than paper. Proof. And I was finally ready to let them create it for me. I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't call Paige. I didn't warn anyone. Instead, I went to the one place I had avoided since the night everything collapsed. My mother's house. Diane Parker had always lived quietly, far from the noise of my marriage and my business. When she opened the door and saw me standing there with tired eyes and rigid posture, she didn't ask questions. She pulled me into a hug and let me breathe for the first time in days. I told her everything, not just about the divorce, but about the money leaving my company, the shell firm, the recordings, Margaret's letter. I expected shock. What I saw instead was something steadier, clarity. You don't need comfort, my mother said calmly when I finished. You need protection. That same afternoon, she introduced me to Grant Holloway. Grant was not loud. He didn't overreact. He listened without interrupting, flipping through documents while the recordings played. When he finally looked up, his expression was firm but controlled. "This isn't just a divorce," he said. "This is financial misconduct, fraud, and possibly obstruction if they destroy records." I asked the question I had been avoiding. "Can I win?" Grant shook his head slightly. "That's the wrong question. You already have enough to act. The real question is how you want this to end." He laid out the options clearly. Civil action to reclaim funds and assets. Criminal investigation if evidence destruction continued. And timing. Timing, he stressed, would determine everything. "If you move too soon, they retreat," he said. "If you wait, they expose themselves." That was when the strategy took shape. I would remain silent, cooperative, apologetic if necessary. Grant would file a preservation notice under the pretext of asset division, forcing internal review without triggering panic. And we would let Daniel and Paige do what careless people always do when they believe they've won. They would rush. They would erase. They would leave fingerprints. Before I left his office, Grant looked at me directly. "This will get uncomfortable," he said. "They will say things, post things, rewrite the story. You'll need discipline." I nodded. I had already survived being thrown into the rain. Discipline wasn't the hard part. That night, I returned to Tasha's apartment and played my role carefully. I spoke little. I moved slowly. I let worry show. I allowed silence to do the work. On my phone, a new message appeared from Margaret. "Vanessa is planning something public. Big. She wants to celebrate her new life." I stared at the screen. A public stage. A place where confidence would turn into carelessness. I typed back one line. "Let me know when." I set the phone down and looked out the window at the city lights. Daniel thought I had reached the end. What he didn't understand was that endings don't begin with noise. They begin with patience. Vanessa's party became the center of everything without her realizing it. She talked about it openly, a celebration of new beginnings, a chance to introduce her new circle, a statement. According to Margaret, the venue alone cost more than most people earned in a year. Daniel was paying for all of it. Grant moved quietly. He submitted a formal request for document preservation to Lark and Lane, framed as a routine step in the divorce process. Nothing aggressive, nothing alarming, just enough to create pressure without revealing intent. Inside the company, I scheduled a short meeting. I kept my tone soft, uncertain. "I've been told there may be a review," I said, looking around the room without making eye contact. "If there's anything missing or unclear, please double-check. I don't want problems." Paige's face tightened for half a second. She recovered quickly, but it was enough. That evening, Margaret sent another message. No commentary, just an audio file. Paige's voice sounded rushed this time. "He's nervous," she said. "If this review goes deeper, we're exposed." Daniel replied without hesitation. "Then don't let it go deeper. Clean it. All of it. Tonight." I didn't feel anger when I listened. I felt distance. Grant explained later that digital systems don't forget the way people think they do. Deleted files leave trails. Altered records create patterns. Attempts to erase history often end up documenting intent. We prepared quietly. Server logs were secured. Backups were mirrored. Access times were recorded. Everything Paige touched that night was tracked. Meanwhile, Vanessa's excitement grew louder online. Photos of dresses, table settings, vague captions about fresh starts and cutting dead weight. Daniel appeared in the background of nearly every image, smiling, relaxed, certain. I stayed invisible. No posts, no messages, no reaction. Silence became my shield. 2 days before the event, Grant called me. "They're done," he said. "They tried to cover it. That's what seals it." I stood by the window after the call ended, watching the city move as it always had. People rushing, lights changing, life continuing. Daniel believed the party would confirm his victory. Vanessa believed it would announce her arrival. Neither of them realized it would be the moment their story stopped being theirs to control. And all I had to do was show up. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel glowed that night, polished and flawless, like nothing ugly could exist inside its walls. Crystal lights reflected off marble floors. Music drifted through the ballroom in smooth, confident rhythms. Guests moved easily from laughter to champagne, dressed in confidence and expensive fabric. Vanessa stood at the center of it all. She wore a fitted ivory dress, her smile practiced, her posture proud. This was her moment, a public declaration that she had stepped into a better life. Daniel stood nearby, relaxed, one arm resting casually around Brooke Lawson, the woman he had replaced me with. They looked untouched by consequence. I arrived quietly. No dramatic entrance, no announcement. I walked in with Grant Holloway and 2 notaries, blending into the edges of the room until the moment arrived. A few heads turned. Whispers followed. People recognized me. The discarded wife. Vanessa froze when she saw me. Daniel's smile faltered, just slightly. Enough to notice. Before either of them could react, the host tapped the microphone and invited everyone to direct their attention to the main screen for a special presentation. That was my cue. I stepped forward and took the microphone from his hand. "My name is Evelyn Parker," I said evenly, "and tonight I brought a gift." The screen lit up. The first images were simple. Photos of Daniel's parents' old home, medical invoices, tuition payments, each labeled clearly, dates, amounts, my name. A quiet murmur spread through the room. Then the next slide appeared. Blue Ridge Consulting, LLC. Bank transfers flowed across the screen in clean lines, monthly payments, identical amounts. The company registration followed. Daniel Parker. Owner. Gasps replaced whispers. I didn't rush. I let the information breathe. The final segment played next. An audio recording filled the ballroom. Daniel's voice, Paige's voice, clear, unmistakable. "Clean everything, no trace." The silence afterward was heavy. Brooke slowly stepped away from Daniel, her expression shifting from confusion to disgust. Vanessa's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Grant stepped forward. "These documents have been notarized and preserved," he announced. "Formal complaints have been filed. This is now a legal matter." The room erupted. Questions flew. Accusations followed. Phones were raised. Conversations broke apart as quickly as the illusion had formed. I placed the microphone back on the stand. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't argue. It simply stands there, undeniable, while everything built on lies collapses around it. As I walked out of the ballroom, the music never resumed. The party was over, and so was their control. The fallout began before the night was over. By morning, the story had spread far beyond the ballroom. Messages filled my phone from people who had watched the scene unfold, from partners who had quietly stepped away from Daniel, from employees who finally understood why things had felt wrong for months. Grant moved faster than public opinion. Formal complaints were filed. Financial records were secured under court order. Daniel and Paige were summoned for questioning before they could coordinate their stories. Travel restrictions followed soon after, quiet but firm, closing doors they hadn't yet realized were about to slam shut. Inside Larkin Lane, I resumed control. Not with speeches, not with accusations. I froze questionable accounts, reassigned access, initiated an independent audit that spoke in numbers instead of emotion. The results were clear, thorough, and impossible to dismiss. Vanessa's role came next. She wasn't charged with theft, but her involvement wasn't ignored. Messages, introductions, pressure applied at the right moments, enough to establish that she had known, encouraged, and benefited. She stopped posting. Daniel tried to reach me once. I didn't answer. Not because I was afraid, and not because I wanted to punish him. There was simply nothing left to say. The legal process didn't need my anger to function. It needed facts. And it had them. As the investigation unfolded, people asked how I felt. Whether I felt satisfied? Whether exposing everything in public had brought me peace? The truth was simpler. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Finished carrying confusion that wasn't mine. Finished protecting people who never protected me. Finished shrinking myself to keep someone else comfortable. Revenge seeks pain. Accountability seeks balance. What happened to Daniel and Paige wasn't something I created out of bitterness. It was the result of choices they made when they thought no one was watching. I didn't destroy their lives. I stepped out of the way and let the truth do its work. And for the first time since the rain soaked through my clothes that night, I slept without bracing myself for impact. I thought the story ended there. I was wrong. A week after the investigation became public, Margaret asked me to meet her. Not at the old house, not at a cafe. She sent me an address in downtown Seattle and a time. I arrived early. The building was modern, all glass and steel, overlooking the bay. Inside, the lobby was quiet, polished, efficient. A receptionist greeted me by name before I said a word and escorted me to the top floor. That should have been my first clue. Margaret was waiting in a private office with floor-to-ceiling windows. She wasn't wearing silk pajamas this time. She wore a tailored blazer, her posture straight, her expression steady. "Sit down, Evelyn," she said gently. I did. She didn't begin with an apology. She began with the truth. "This company," she said, gesturing toward the city below, "is mine. I founded it with my father decades ago. I stepped back publicly, but I never gave up control." Whitmore Development Group, one of the largest real estate firms on the West Coast. The words settled slowly. She explained that she had lived quietly by choice, that wealth had taught her how quickly people changed once they believed they were entitled to it. She wanted to see who her children were when they thought she had nothing left to offer. Daniel and Vanessa had answered that question for her. You, she said, meeting my eyes, answered a different one. She told me she had watched how I treated her before money or power was ever visible, how I paid bills without reminders, how I showed up without being asked, how I gave without keeping score. That's why I stepped in, she said. Not to punish them, to protect you. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents, training plans, a formal offer. She wanted me to take an executive role within the company, to learn, to lead, to eventually replace her. I stared at the papers, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. I don't belong here, I said honestly. Margaret smiled softly. You didn't belong in the rain either, she replied, but you survived it. I left the building with the folder tucked under my arm and a strange calm in my chest. The marriage had ended, but something far larger had just begun. I didn't step into my new life with celebration. I stepped into it quietly. I took the role Margaret offered, not as a reward, but as a responsibility. I studied, I listened. I learned how power worked when it wasn't loud, when it didn't need to prove itself. For the first time, I wasn't building something to save a relationship. I was building something to honor myself. Daniel faded into the background of my life. So did Vanessa. Not because I erased them, but because they no longer belonged in my future. What stayed with me was clarity. Love without boundaries is not devotion. It is risk. Trust without structure is not faith. It is exposure. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Walking away doesn't always mean losing. Sometimes it's the moment you finally stop bleeding. If you've ever rebuilt your life after betrayal, share your story in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. If this story spoke to you, like, share, and subscribe to The Art of Revenge. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming untouchable. Thank you for staying with Evelyn's story until the very end. Stories like this are not about revenge for the sake of pain. They are about truth, boundaries, and the quiet strength it takes to walk away when staying would cost you everything. Evelyn didn't win because she exposed anyone publicly. She won because she stopped accepting less than she deserved. She chose clarity over chaos, accountability over anger, growth over bitterness. If you see yourself in any part of her journey, know this. You are not weak for trusting. You are not foolish for loving deeply, but you do have the right to protect what you build, emotionally and financially. On this channel, The Art of Revenge, we share real-life-inspired stories of people who were pushed to the edge and chose to stand back up with dignity. If this story resonated with you, please like the video, share it with someone who may need to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this. And if you have a story of your own, one about resilience, loss, or reclaiming your life, leave a comment below. Your story might be the one that helps someone else survive their storm. Until next time, take care of yourself